and then I'll start the webinar. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome in. We'll just give it a few more minutes for a few people to join in before we get started. Give it just a few more minutes. Okay, perfect. I think we can get started. Welcome, everyone. Today we are joined by our partners at the ILRC, and then we have some important information for you. And then with the sake of time, we'll go ahead and get started.
I was not on mute. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. Thank you for joining us today for Your Rights, Your Future, an overview of immigrants in California. Couple of housekeeping things. I think I gotta go back one. Okay, a couple of housekeeping items for folks. I do see a question already that, yes, the webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to get a recording of it, and we'll be sharing contact information at the end of the webinar. If you have questions, we're going to throw a lot of information at you, so please use the Q&A tool to ask those questions. We're going to try to get to as many as we can. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to take case-specific questions, but we're going to hopefully be able to leave about 15 minutes to answer questions that come up. And we can share all of the links and whatnot, which will be in the slides. We can also share those during the chat if folks need. So without further ado, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Liz Talufa. I am a senior policy attorney and strategist with the Immigrant Legal Resource Center. I work out of the DC office. I am joined by my wonderful colleague, Neil Tanakora, who's a staff attorney in our San Francisco office. We are very excited to be here with you today. So we're going to go through some things. Again, we might end up going through some things kind of fast. Again, it's a lot of information. Please feel free to use that Q&A function. So we're just going to go over some level setting things at the beginning, sort of talking about what's different between Trump 2.0 and Trump 1.0, which is what we've taken to calling it sort of internally, and what we can expect here in the next, certainly next week, and then also potentially within the next 6 to 12 months. We're going to talk a little bit about applying for USCIS benefits and what the risks of that can be. And then we're going to go over some basic information as well about immigration enforcement and ICE, how people are identified, detained, and deported, how we can disrupt that pipeline and fight back in knowing your rights and the state and local laws here in California, and also just some basic info on ICE detention and how to get out of ICE detention if you find yourself in ICE detention. So kind of talking through a little bit of what we can expect this time. Again, we have been through one Trump administration before. We are expecting it to be just as bad, if not worse, this time. We don't say any of this to frighten anybody, but just to make sure that everyone's sort of aware of where we are right now. So kind of getting into where we are right now. there are some good things and some bad things about having this be the second time around that we are dealing with the Trump administration. So the bad, we'll start there. Incoming admin is a little bit more organized. They were not very organized last time going in because they don't think anyone expected them to win. So they were starting a little bit on the back foot, trying to put together an administration when they really hadn't spent a lot of time doing that. And that's not the case this time. They are much more organized than they were before. Um, we are unlikely to see mitigating forces this time as well, depending on your opinion of how the White House was staffed between 2017 and 2020, 2021. The sort of more middle of the road folks are not likely to find positions of power. It's been a bit of a loyalty test so far. And unfortunately, those mitigating forces do include the federal judiciary. It's a very different than it was. We have a very different Supreme Court than we did last time. So that's all very worrisome. And we are, inauguration day is on Monday. We are expecting splashy, rapid changes probably right away. There were a lot of promises made on the campaign trail, and they're looking to make sure that folks know that they need to make good on those promises. So as far as what's good with this, we are also more organized. And by we, I mean immigrant communities, I mean the immigrant advocacy space, I mean legal representatives, because we have been through this before. And it was hard last time, it's going to be hard this time, but we developed a lot of tools and networks and processes and resources and whatnot that will come in handy for us this time as well. So by having more organization on our side, I think we're in a better position to respond to what comes down the pike. We also have a roadmap of what to expect, regardless of what your position was on Project 2025. They did write down all of the things that they wanted to do in the next 4 years. And for the immigration side, anyway, I think it's there weren't a lot of surprises in there. It was stuff that they tried to do last time. It was stuff they've been very vocal about. So I think it's pretty good that we have something to rely on. We can kind of go back and we've been able, our organization, I think a lot of organizations did a lot of analysis of Project 2025, trying to figure out what it is we needed to be ready to go on as we went into this next phase. So that was really helpful. And again, we've done this before, so we're more ready than we were last time. I think last time everybody was not really sure what to expect. I don't think that's the case now. So that kind of preparation and information is invaluable this time around. A couple things to remember as we go through the webinar, but also just generally when we're listening to the new administration talk about immigration. There is a difference between rhetoric and action. What happened last time and what's likely to happen this time based on the presidential transition period is that we're likely to see a lot of talk on Twitter, a lot of crosstalk on Twitter between different places, a lot of infighting in public spaces. And there's a difference between what they say and what they do. And so staying informed is really the best way to prepare, because one of the things that I think ILRC will be focusing on, and hopefully everyone else will be focusing on as well, is not just necessarily what's being said on social media, but what's actually being done, and trying to figure out ways to protect our communities from the actions and not from just the media elevating hate speech that they don't really need to be elevating. So day one, which is Monday, we have an expectation that we're going to be seeing a lot of executive orders, that we're going to be seeing a lot of movement. That's what they've told us. Who knows if it's going to happen, but we're prepared, we're ready to go. But I think that there will be a bevy of executive orders coming down, a lot of them having to do with immigration on day one. One of those things will be likely a national emergency declaration to supposedly deal with processing the border. Basically, what it's going to do is it's going to shut down asylum processing at the border, or they're going to seek to do that anyway. We can probably also expect some sort of splashy enforcement actions, raids, again, a border shutdown. We've already seen, folks in California have already seen some workplace raids, worksite raids in the last couple of weeks. So we expect that to continue. Don't necessarily think that it's going to be a huge nationwide enforcement action that takes time, energy, resources that quite frankly, ICE doesn't have. But we will see some things with that are very well publicized. So folks are the point is to scare people and to make sure that everyone knew they were serious. So likely to see some stuff like that. So kind of getting into some um, of the issue areas that we can expect to see some changes as we go along this year. In the enforcement space, again, we're likely to see an uptick in raids. This happened, if you'll remember, back to 2017. For those of you who were old enough to have been watching the news in 2017, there were rescissions of enforcement priorities and sensitive locations memos that had been promulgated by the Obama administration. What that resulted in was making everybody an enforcement priority. And so if ICE went in to look for a specific person in a workplace, for instance, then they could pick up anybody that was undocumented and start processing them. And so we're likely to see more of that happen as we get into this new administration. Um, we will probably see an increase in detention, an increase in detention facilities, an increase in detention beds. They have said multiple times they will be doing expansions of facilities along the border, including tent cities. So we'll probably see some of that wrapped up in that national emergency declaration. We will probably see an increase in surveillance, which includes biometrics collection, so fingerprints and face recognition. A lot more data sharing across state, local, and federal agencies. We'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide. But we'll also probably see increases to surveillance apparatus for folks that are in removal proceedings, so ankle bracelets, geo-tracking on phones, ICE check-ins, that sort of thing. Going back to the increased cooperation between state and local law enforcement, there are already a number of jurisdictions that readily cooperate with ICE as far as non-citizens who enter the criminal enforcement space. There are other jurisdictions that are sanctuary jurisdictions that do not cooperate with ICE. So we're likely to see where there are jurisdictions that are somewhere in the middle that haven't declared one side or the other. Incentives by the federal government to cooperate, so to kind of push people to cooperate more, threats to sanctuary jurisdictions to withhold federal money or other resources that the state normally gets if they don't rescind their sanctuary status. So we're already starting to see some of this in California Fire Aid for the wildfires in Southern California, where Congress is debating whether or not they should condition LA wildfire relief on sanctuary status and pushing back on some of that. So the kind of the making it a little bit more political than and things like disaster relief and whatnot. So trying to sort of strong arm sanctuary jurisdictions into abandoning their sanctuary status and cooperating with federal law enforcement. And we're likely also going to see an increase in harmful state legislation. We saw that, we've been seeing that that's a trend for years and years, but if you really look for examples in Texas and Florida and some of the really harmful anti-immigrant legislation that's come out of those state houses, and the numbers of copycat laws that we've seen pop up in various states. ILRC has a copycat criminal enforcement brief that I can put in the chat if anybody wants to read it, just sort of talking about the kind of the switch and the change in state legislatures and how they've been sort of following Texas and Florida's leads in trying to make harmful immigration policy at the state level. Not to be a total downer, there are sanctuary jurisdictions, California being one of them, that have vowed to fight against these types of strong arming by the federal government. And so I'm sure if you've been listening to Gavin Newsom, there's been money that has been allocated to protect the state against attacks like this. And so we'll see how that ends up playing out, but not without, it's not without its, people are fighting back already, are planning to fight back already. So that's a good sign. Okay. So students, I know we have a lot of students on the call today. We don't have a hugely great idea of how the new administration is going to affect international students or students without status. One possible way is they can start using student visas as a sort of a carrot and stick sort of mechanism to get various countries to accept folks that they want to remove from the country. So where a country has been more recalcitrant to accept those with removal orders, they may say, okay, well, we're going to reduce the numbers of student or business or tourist or any other kind of non-immigrant visa until you agree to take these folks back. So that's one way we could see, that's one thing that could affect student visas. Um, Again, we're going to see an incentivizing a cooperation with ICE, whether that be through offering something or trying to take something away from sanctuary states. So, talking to things about data sharing, if they're going to share out of status notifications, any criminal issues that students have. Um, there are privacy laws in effect in California that should help with some of this, but again, policies can change. Congress is not in much of a mood to help help anybody at the moment, if and the first couple of weeks of the year to be believed. So policies could change, but there are still protections. We'll talk about those in a few minutes. Public benefits, again, we'll talk about this a little bit more in depth. Public charge is a priority for this new administration. It's been a priority. They did promulgate a public charge rule during the first Trump administration, which was halted by litigation. The Biden administration did promulgate a final regulation in December of 2022 that basically puts in place or formalizes the long time understanding of public charge. But we are likely to see a new DHS rule in 2025 or 2026 as it is a priority for this administration. Just quickly going through some temporary forms of relief, temporary protected status. It's very unlikely that we'll see the administration designate new countries for TPS. We're also likely to see sort of a wind down of existing designations. If you're dialed into the TPS space, earlier this week, I believe, I don't think it was last week, I think it was earlier this week. I've lost track of time. We did get extensions from the Biden administration for El Salvador, Ukraine, Venezuela, and Sudan. Unfortunately, that may end up being the last extensions we see. It's not impossible that we'll see new designations or extensions. The Trump administration did try to terminate TPS for a number of countries during the first term, but Venezuela was designated during the last days of Trump's last term. So it's possible we could see new designations. Nothing's impossible, but it's much more likely that we will see wind downs of extensions and fewer people that are going to be eligible for TPS. For DACA, right now there is an ongoing court case, which is sitting with the Fifth Circuit, which is likely very likely to rule against DACA. If you'll remember, a year or so ago, 2 years ago, there was a rule that was promulgated by the Biden administration on DACA, and that kind of kept DACA as we know it in place. But Texas immediately sued on that as well. There was already ongoing litigation. And so the district court in Texas held that DACA, the program, and DACA, the rule, were unlawful. We're expecting a similar ruling from the Fifth Circuit. We have not gotten that ruling yet. At this point, it looks like the ruling will come after Trump takes office. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes. But the DACA case will likely go to the Supreme Court again. And it's possible we could get a different decision from the Supreme Court than the last time that DACA was at the Supreme Court, given the makeup of SCOTUS at the moment. But regardless, we will likely see a slowing down or a halting of processing of DACA applications at USCIS. Again, we'll talk about that a little bit in a moment. For parole, again, the Biden administration expanded its use of parole quite extensively during its time by implementing new parole programs. Those new programs are likely to be terminated, and new parole programs it's very unlikely that we'll see any new programs under the Trump administration for parole to bring folks in, and also reduction in reparole options for anybody currently in the states that has parole and doesn't have another form of relief pending or doesn't have another form of relief already. Advanced parole for travel will likely see a slowdown of the processing of those applications. We are coming down to the wire, but if you have DACA or TPS or another status and you've got advanced parole, you haven't traveled yet, it's probably a good idea to travel and make sure you're back before Monday. It could be fine after Monday, but it's probably best to not take the chance until we see a little bit more of what's going on and what comes out of those executive orders on day one. Okay, so generally with USCIS processing, so the USCIS is obviously the organization or is the office that all of the immigration benefits go to. So you're applying for naturalization, you're applying for a green card, you're applying for DACA, for TPS, for everything gets processed at USCIS. USCIS is a fee-funded agency, so that means they don't get their money from Congress, they get it from application fees. But basing what happened to USCIS during the last Trump administration, which remember the last year of the Trump administration was also COVID, so that had a big effect. But we saw a huge slowdown of processing at USCIS the last time. There were a lot of reasons for that. One of them was, again, at the end of the administration, it was COVID. But before that, it was tougher adjudication processes, adjudicators being instructed to look for fraud indicators a lot more deeply than they do normally. Even where there have never been any fraud indicators, a lot of re-adjudication of applications, much more in-depth interviews. And then we also saw an increase of USCIS fees, which was also done by regulation, was also subject to litigation, was also stopped. We do have a new USCIS fee rule that's been in place since January of 2024. We are likely to see another fee rule come out of the Trump administration, mostly because they are supposed to do it every 2 years. Regardless, we're likely to see an increase of fees. So all of those are going to be barriers to people being able to get their applications processing. So if you're thinking about applying for a benefit, if you're eligible for a benefit, you've talked to an immigration representative that you trust and you want to apply, there are some risks and benefits to applying after Monday. So basically, whether or not you're at a higher risk or a lower risk is going to come down to your personal situation. So I'm going to start off by just reminding everybody that you should get an immigration consult with a legal representative that you trust. It's a good idea to do that regardless of whether or not you've been screened in the past or whether you think you're eligible for something. It's always just a good idea to periodically get screened by a legal representative if you can. So you really do need to know, with your own personal situation, what the risk is as far as applying for something, sending your information on an immigration benefit application to USCIS. So if you've never, if somebody has never been in any kind of immigration proceedings and they're applying for the first time, this is the first time they're going to give their information to the government, there may be some considerations before you decide to do that. There is some risk in sending your information to USCIS. Remember, USCIS and ICE are separate agencies underneath the umbrella of the Department of Homeland Security. So it's really one agency. There's a lot of information that's shared. When you file an application with USCIS, they will share information with ICE. And one of the issues that we expect to see more of is that if someone files an application, they're not eligible, and it turns out they have a criminal history or some other indicator, we could see a shift of USCIS actually referring that person to ICE to be put in removal proceedings. That happened during the first Trump administration. There was a memo on how USCIS should be referring and issuing what we call notices to appear, which are the charging documents to begin someone's removal proceedings. We do expect to see a resurgence of that. So if you are someone who has never been in any kind of immigration proceedings at all before, if you are applying for something for the first time, just keep that in mind that their risks probably are going up after Monday. Folks that are on a greater risk when applying for an immigration benefit are certainly people who already have final orders of removal. Again, important to get an immigration consultation to kind of do some digging and make sure that that's not your situation. A lot of people have removal orders that they never knew about because they never got the notice of the proceedings in the mail and whatnot. So always a good idea to get screened before you apply for anything. And folks that do have a criminal history, those folks are going to be scrutinized a lot harder when it comes to an immigration benefit application. There are waivers that people can get for various things, depending on the immigration benefit, depending on the individual. But again, you really need to talk to an immigration representative before you decide to apply for a waiver or anything else. Folks with prior removal orders too need to be careful, just because if you've already got an order of removal, your options for any kind of hearing or reopening your proceedings are very low. So again, make sure you get screened before you put anything in. Even if you're been screened in the past year, maybe just get screened one more time. One separate note: if you're already in removal proceedings, there's a much lower risk actually for you to apply for a benefit for which you're eligible at USCIS. The government already has your information. You're already in removal proceedings, so they can't really refer you to removal proceedings again. So the risk for those folks might be a little bit lower. So when it comes to public benefits like food programs, housing programs, medical programs, there are, some risks to applying, but remember that there's a current law, a current regulation already in place that was promulgated by the Biden administration. And if the Trump administration wants to change it, they have to go through a whole process. It's going to take several months to a year. So they can't change public charge law at the Department of Homeland Security that quickly. They can change it, and they probably will try to change it. But until they are done with the rulemaking process, the DHS public charge rule is in effect until the such time that there's another rule. Reminder that not everyone is subject to the public charge ground of inadmissibility when they're applying for a benefit. There certainly are a large number of people that are subject to it, but again, it's important to get screened to see if you're even if that's even something you need to worry about. Really important note: public charge does not apply to U.S. citizens, and that includes the U.S. citizens of undocumented parents. It doesn't apply to most people that have a green card. It doesn't apply to most asylees, refugees, people with UTs and VAWAs, and a bunch of others. So again, make sure you get screened to see if this is an issue for you. We have a link there on the screen to the list of safe public benefits the IRC has put out for California, but reminders that health programs like Medicaid, COVID care, housing, food programs, and other vital services are safe to use. So go ahead and continue to utilize those. As far as whether or not that information will be shared with ICE, currently it will not be shared with ICE, but again, we need to watch this space for any sort of policy changes as they come up. I'm going to move faster through this to make sure that Mio gets enough time to go through her slides. So just one thing for educational benefits. We don't know, again, how policy is going to change with the new administration, but there are rights that folks have. There are privacy rights under the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. So you're not required to provide your SSN, your social security number on applications to enroll in college or university. But if you're applying for a program under California DREAM Act, it might be helpful to put that information in. You also don't have to put a country of citizenship for financial aid purposes. You can leave that blank. For FAFSA, parents don't have to put, if they don't have an SSN, a FAFSA can still be filled out. Again, we're not 100% sure how that area is going to change, but for now, it's safe to do so. And again, if you're, the California DREAM Act state aid programs do request the SSN or ATIN, but it's optional, so you don't have to provide it. So just make the best choice for yourself and your family as you're looking at this. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Neil.
Hi all, good afternoon. It is a pleasure being with you all today. As Liz first said, we have a lot of materials, so I will be covering them a bit faster, just to respect people's time. So before we get started on the material knowing your rights, we must understand first why we need to protect our rights from immigration enforcement. In order to do this, we have to understand what is immigration enforcement and how it operates. So here are some key moments in recent US history. We have to know our history before we can dive into immigration enforcement. For time's sake, I'm only going to point out that this is a long history that has been embedded into a racialized nature of immigration enforcement. It's as tale as old as our country. Here you'll see some key moments in history. One of them that I'll point out is the Department of Homeland Security was created in 2002. This was after the 9/11 attack, which now oversees ICE. And so immigration enforcement has evolved throughout the years with more aggressive enforcement tactics, and so keeping that in the background as you go through this information. Now, this is a quick poll of who do you think can be deported? And I believe, Cynthia, if you can launch quickly the poll. And I'll just give that a few seconds to see what the responses are. Can everyone see the poll? Okay. Cynthia, is there, can I see the answer? Okay. Um, I don't see, I see a lot of people participated, but I don't see the results. But for time's sake, if you answered everyone except US citizens, you are correct. Everyone in this chart can be deported. I will say for US citizens, there is a denaturalization process. Just to give you statistics, between 2008 and 2021, there were about 228 referrals to denaturalize folks, and 40% of them came from the Trump administration. But that is a very low number. So now I want to cover what is immigration enforcement. It is the identification, the arrest and detention and removal of non-citizens. Throughout the years, the identification of non-citizens has increased in more aggressive surveillance tactics that ICE has used. For example, monitoring people through either the criminal justice system or through the DMV. So basically for immigration enforcement, it varies on what kind of status the person has. So ICE can take action against anyone who is undocumented. They only need evidence of foreign birth and lack of status, meaning they can have simply like a verbal statement that a person has telling them they're not a US citizen, and they can act on that statement alone. That's why when we cover know your rights material upcoming, it would be crucial to remain silent. We will cover that more in depth after. People also with criminal history can be put on ICE's radar very quickly. And they don't need a conviction. It can be a simple arrest, and that can put them on the radar, and they can act on it. And I'll describe how they can act on it in a few slides. If person is in lawful status, now that's a little bit more trickier for ICE. They have to have some kind of legal basis to initiate deportation. Usually, if there's a criminal conviction, that can trigger deportability grounds, which just means that the lawful status can go away if it triggers a criminal conviction. Okay. So who is affected by immigration enforcement? Again, what I want you to remember is anyone who is not a citizen can be deported. For immigrants with no relief from deportation, not getting found by ICE is their best defense. Fighting ICE surveillance in collusion with law enforcement, knowing your rights training, what you're doing right now, helps for those who have no relief from deportation. And you've heard Liz already talk about this, but the way you know that you have no relief from deportation is if you consult with an immigration attorney. That is the only way to be certain that you really do not qualify for any immigration benefits. For lawful permanent residents, now that's a different story. There might be some avenues for relief, especially avoiding criminal convictions altogether that can protect them. And there's also a mechanism called post-conviction relief. We're not going to touch that on today, but basically it's a process to eliminate that conviction altogether. And that could be a very effective method to fighting deportation. Now, here is the deportation pipeline. What we call is these type of arrests that funnel people into the deportation stream process. We call it a pipeline because it's sort of like funneling people into this process. As you can see here, there are different circles with different measurements here. The biggest one that you see is this red one, jails and prison transfers. Now, from the data, a lot of the interior enforcement that happens within the United States comes from either the local prison or state prison that transfers folks into detention. Also, we have here worksite raids and home arrests. Liz already touched upon applying for immigration benefit that could be denied, and then you get put into removal proceedings. I do want to say for worksite raids and home arrests, these could be, we could see an uptick in the new administration of these raids. All we can do right now is anticipate that there will be an increase. Where they're going to happen, how frequently they're going to happen, that remains to be seen. Okay. So now I just want to highlight for home and work raids, where does ICE get their information? A lot of the information can come from photos and addresses directly from the DMV. They use also automated license plate readers to track people's movements, and they monitor ankle monitors, shackles of other immigrants in proceedings to see whom they live or work with. And here is just a chart of demonstrating, again, that large majority of local jails and state prisons, those are primarily the arrests that happen, and they usually come in through detainers. What is a detainer, you might be asking? It is a form that ICE uses to send to local police, basically to tell them to notify when the person's going to be released and to hold them for 48 hours so ICE can pick them up. And basically that's sort of a transfer from the local police to ICE. So that is the form, again, what is called a detainer. Now, how often do local law enforcement and ICE collaborate? All the time. I want you to remember that. Even in sanctuary states, like in California, we have sanctuary protections that I'm going to be covering. There's still collaboration with ICE. There are some counties that have altogether eliminated that cooperation, but that is county specific. What are some of the common collaborations ICE gets automatic information on everyone coming into custody. And that is because of us, that is because of the Secure Communities program that I'll be covering in a later slide, that basically, once you get fingerprinted, everyone's information, including US citizens, gets feeded into the FBI and ICE databases to check for criminal history and citizenship status. Yes, that means everyone, even US citizens. Sheriffs also let ICE know whenever a non-citizen is going to be released, so ICE can get them, but that's limited by California law. And sheriffs transfer people directly to ICE within the jail. Again, that's limited by California law, which I'll cover in about 2 slides. Other things that do happen. ICE agents have frequent or scheduled pickups from the jail. ICE may also have access to local databases with information, and ICE may seek to interrogate people in local custody. Some even ICE has authority to come into the local jail and even have an interview room just for them. Again, it depends on the locality, but there are some venues in California and outside of California that could have that. Sorry, here we go. So Secure Communities Program, what is it? It got started in 2007. Again, it sends fingerprint data from when a person gets booked for an arrest to immigration databases. Here it shows a depiction of how this process happens. Again, if you were listening, even US citizens get their fingerprints cross-referenced with FBI and ICE databases. Okay. So now we need to fight back. And the way we fight back is by knowing what the state and local laws say, and also knowing your rights, constitutional rights that everyone has, regardless of immigration status. Now, the 2 laws that protect Californians, immigrants in California, are the California Values Act, which is also known as SB 54. So I'll be saying that a lot, SB 54, and the Truth Act. SB 54 restricts significantly the cooperation between law enforcement and ICE. For example, local police can't ask about immigration status, can't use ICE as interpreters when someone is arrested, can't share their personal information, like their home address or their work address, unless it's publicly available, limits ability of the local police to cooperate with ICE arrests from jail. Additionally, the Truth Act has more protections. Basically, someone who is arrested can decline to be interviewed by ICE. They do not have to be interviewed. Only they can proceed with the interview if an attorney is present. If an attorney is present, if they would like one, or with the consent of the person. Here are some local policies that prohibit cooperation altogether, meaning they do not cooperate with ICE, not one bit. Some examples of these counties are here: Los Angeles, San Mateo, Alameda, Contra Costa, Santa Clara, and San Francisco. Now, here is a depiction of just what the California law prohibits. And again, here highlighted is that this cooperation is totally voluntary. What I mean by that is local police and agencies that work with ICE do it because they choose to. And that is important to remember, because a lot of advocacy has gone to educating local law enforcement agencies and persuading them to stop cooperating with ICE. The counties that I just mentioned have won battles in their counties to stop this cooperation altogether. So here again, ICE cannot hold a person for 48 hours for ICE to come get them after they have been arrested and are jailed. That is completely prohibited under SB 54. Now, notification of their release and transfers is prohibited, but there are certain carve-outs for certain criminal convictions. So there is a little bit trickier, but these criminal convictions are usually more serious convictions like felonies. So are there any other advocacy or the tools protections that we should keep in mind? Sorry. Basically, reducing arrests and prosecutions is crucial to protecting immigrant communities. Here, what you want to remember is the less arrests that we can stop, the more support it's going to have for immigrant communities. This can be through advocacy. As I said before, a lot of these counties have won these battles because they have demonstrated that taking away a member of the immigrant community disrupts an entire county and that community. So being part of that conversation and part of that advocacy is crucial, especially coming up in the new administration. Okay, so now let's dive into know your rights. I want everyone to remember that everyone in the United States, regardless of your immigration status, has certain constitutional rights. And what are they? Well, you have the right to remain silent. You don't have to answer questions. Calmly ask if you are free to go. Especially don't admit place of birth, citizenship, or immigration status or manner of entry to the US. This is crucial to remain calmly and don't answer any questions. And one thing I'll keep repeating as I go through this slide is that practice these rights. I think at the moment when you are approached by an ICE officer, you're going to be nervous. That's understandable. But if you practice with someone these rights, maybe for the time period, I don't have the time to role play, but I love role playing with folks as me pretending to be an ICE agent and the person being the non-citizen. Because that way you can sort of practice how you're going to react in certain situations. So these are the things to remember, but I want you as homework to go and practice with a loved one or a friend. In the last slide, we have a lot of resources. We have literally skits that you can read off and practice these rights. Again, one of your rights is remaining silent. Another one is don't open the door. Refuse to let any ICE agent in without a judicial warrant. If an ICE agent is at your door, you can ask who they are and ask to provide you with identification under the door. In addition, if they say they have a warrant, ask them to slip the warrant under the door. Look at the warrant and see if it was signed by a judge. A valid judicial warrant will say honorable or a name of a judge, or it will say HOM as an abbreviation for honorable. If it is not a valid warrant, you can say you're asserting your right and will not open the door. That's all you have to say. Another right that is extremely important here is not signing anything. If you are detained, ask to speak to a lawyer and do not sign anything. A lot of folks have experienced basically ICE trying to get them to sign voluntary departure documents saying that they want to go back to their home country freely. So please do not fall for it and don't sign anything and ask for a lawyer. Okay, so here we have our red cards. They're in 16 different languages. Here is the link you will see there for how to get them to distribute to yourself or family members or anyone else. It's so important to carry these with you to assert your right. And these are the same rights that we just went over, but the beauty of these cards is, let's just say in the moment, you are nervous, you don't know what to do, your heart is pounding, you are, your brain is not functioning correctly, and you don't know what to say or do. Simply give them this red card. And hopefully the ICE agent will read it and will stop any enforcement action at that time. So now I want to just, again, this is all about practicing your rights. Oh, geez. Here you go. Sir, let me see if I can click. I just want you to see this video in action. We have a lot of these videos hyperlinked in our last slide with resources, but this is one that I want you to look at because it's specific to encountering ICE while you're walking. And it's very good. Hold on. Sorry, Cynthia. Is there any way to click on it? Thank you.
It was a normal afternoon. Judy and her friend Liz went out for lunch. The two met in elementary school and have been friends ever since. Liz is an American citizen, and while Judy was brought to the U.S. by her parents when she was only 4 years old, she is undocumented. Liz noticed two men that seemed to be following them, but she thought nothing of it. That's when the men called out Judy's name as if they were old friends. When she turned, the men approached fast. Judy had just been identified by ICE. ICE stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Stories like this happen every day and are happening now more than ever. ICE approaches people in the street, at work, in their car, or even in court. They often will not be in uniform. It's scary. But remember, we have rights. If you are stopped by authorities and don't know who they are, ask them to identify themselves. Then ask, am I free to go? If they say yes, walk away and do not answer any questions. In Judy's case, the agents told her she was not free to go. If this happens, do not resist or run away, and do not say anything, except I want to use my right to remain silent. I want to speak to a lawyer. Remember, you can ask to speak to a lawyer even if you don't have one. If the agents search your bag or your person, say, I do not agree to this search. They are looking for documents proving your immigration status. Witnesses have the right to film the interaction as long as they do not interrupt the arrest and they are transparent that they are filming. Judy was lucky. Even if you do everything right in a similar scenario, ICE may still arrest you. Another video in this series will help you understand your rights if you are arrested. After the encounter, Judy and Liz took notes about what happened, writing down as many details as they could remember. Be sure that you and your loved ones are prepared for encounters with ICE and that you have a plan for what to do if one of you.
Thank you, Cynthia. For time's sake, I hope that video was informative. Again, we have hyperlinked in our last slide the other videos that you can watch. Now I'll turn it back to Liz to talk a little bit of just what happens if you're detained. What are the options there?
Thanks, Mia. Let's see. It's not letting me advance. Cynthia, are you able to advance the slide? There we go. Okay, so just a couple of quick slides on what happens if you are arrested by ICE and detained. Oh, there it is. Okay, back to this. So this is a kind of a little graphic of how how it goes, how the detention and deportation system works. You're arrested, you're put in immigration detention. ICE decides whether or not to give you a bond payment or to hold you. You can challenge that decision in an immigration court, and it can go up through the appellate process. This process can take years, and unfortunately, you may be detained while that process is going through, kind of wending its way through our very slow immigration and justice system. So just remember, as Mio pointed out, you have rights throughout this entire process. You do have the right to see a judge unless you have a prior order of removal. You have the right to an attorney at your own expense. The government will not assign you an attorney like they do in criminal court, but you do have the right to be represented by an attorney that you have on your own. And you also have a right to a court interpreter in this process. So you have a right to an interpreter that speaks the language you speak best. So if a person is arrested and put in ICE detention, can you get out? The answer, like most things, is more complicated than yes or no. So generally, when you're arrested by ICE or a person is arrested by ICE, they are taken into a processing office, and the ICE officer will look at, your any prior criminal history, will look at anything they can find on you through the different databases that the federal government has access to, and they'll make a determination on whether or not they think that you are a danger to society. Make a custody determination. So they can release the person on their own. They can release somebody on their own. We see this a lot with folks that don't have any kind of criminal history, maybe folks that are picked up in like workplace raids or something along those lines. People that have children at home, there are a lot of different factors that ICE considers. They can release the person under some sort of supervision apparatus, so an ankle bracelet, or there's an app on the phone that you have to check in with that geotags you, or a condition that you have to check in with ICE at over a certain period of time, some sort of condition. They're releasing you, but they're still keeping an eye on you. Or they can choose to detain the person and set a bond. And they get to set the level of that bond as well. So important to know here as well that you can challenge ICE's determination of bond. So your bond was set too high, they decided not to set a bond and they want to detain you. You can challenge that determination in front of a judge, and you can present your case on why you should be given a bond or why your bond should be lower. But there is a class of people who are not entitled to a bond hearing, and those are folks who are subject to mandatory detention. We're not going to go into mandatory detention. We could probably do 6 or 7 webinars on mandatory detention and what it entails. So just the long and short of it is that folks that have certain, criminal records, or or certain, certain folks that have come to the ICE detention system through the state or local criminal system as well, they will not be released on bond, and they don't have a right to a hearing. If you have been subjected to mandatory detention, if ICE has said you are to be mandatorily detained, you can challenge that understanding and say, no, I'm not supposed to be mandatorily detained, and I want a bond hearing. And that can be done through a special hearing process. So if you are not detained, but you have a family member or a friend or community member who is detained, you want to make sure that you're speaking to an immigration attorney as soon as possible. If you are detained, that can be difficult. Usually in detention centers, there are numbers for rapid response networks. There are pro bono lists of attorneys and organizations who can represent you. Those are limited in the cases they can take, because there's usually only a few names on the list and only so many people that can help. But there are rapid response networks that can try to help you and maybe help you figure out a way to get in contact with your family or an attorney. If you are outside of detention and somebody has been arrested and is being detained, keep in mind that even if you're arrested in San Francisco, you may end up detained in a different part of California or in a different state altogether. And so ICE has a locator to find folks that they have in their custody. And so this just works for folks that are in ICE custody. It doesn't work for folks that are in CBP custody along the border. But you can use an A number or biographic information in order to find the person and find out where they are in the ICE system. So our last slide here is just some resources, some links to be aware of. These are all things that you should, if you're, you're undocumented, if you've got undocumented family members, these are all links that are going to be important as you sort of set out your preparedness goals for the year and for the administration to come. So the first is the CCIJ Rapid Response Network list. It is by region. And that's throughout California. So those are folks that may be able to help if you are detained or someone else in your family is detained. The ILRC recently updated our family preparedness plan. It's a public advisory, but it's also it's got a series of worksheets to help you make your own family preparedness plan. So please feel free to check that out and use that. There's also going to be some, we're going to be doing webinars and websites sometime, hopefully in the month of February, in English and Spanish that will cover some of this as well. The role-playing skits in English and Spanish are also available on our website. So please take a look at those and really, as Mia said, give it a try and see, and really just start practicing. It's one of the best things you can do is be prepared. We also have our red cards, which Mia showed you. They're available in several languages on our website. For nonprofit organizations, you can order them in bulk for free. For private entities, there is a charge for them. But there's also free PDFs to download in all of the languages that we have. So you don't have to order them. You can just download the PDF and print them yourselves. Great to have to carry around with you. They're wallet size. I always have some on me and also in my purse. So you can also, again, one of the things that we really want you to take a look at is somebody asked in the Q&A about media outlets that you can follow for immigration. I am a little bit biased because I do think that the media does not cover immigration very even-handedly. They tend to elevate hate speech and they tend to elevate things that are, not super connected to the reality of whatever situation it is, tends to be really one-sided. So consider following organizations like the ILRC on social media. We're going to be doing our best to get out timely information about the rapid changes we're expecting. So we're on Instagram, Facebook, X. We have a TikTok for as long as TikTok exists. I don't know how much longer we're going to have TikTok, but our TikTok is there. And again, just, to just really just hammer it home, get an immigration consultation. Even if you've been screened recently, just get another one just to make sure that you are considering all options and protecting yourself. I also see a lot of questions about advanced parole and EADs and whatnot. And so a legal consultation can really help you sort of identify the risks and benefits to applying given your individual situation. So really, it's a great idea to see if you can get a consultation with somebody that you trust as we're entering this new space. So I think that's all we have as far as we're doing questions now. Alonzo or Cynthia?
I think just for the sake of time, we have run out of time, but we've made a note of all of the questions and we'll categorize them and make sure that we provide resources and links to most of the questions that are in there around DACA, FERPA, SB 54, as well as links to the Immigration Legal Services available for institutions of higher learning for the California community as a whole. And we'll also share some information on financial aid. I saw a lot of those questions, so we'll go through them, make sure that we add appropriate resources, and we'll get those to you in the inboxes through the email addresses that you all provided when you registered for today. I see some hands raised. Unfortunately, we can't take any more questions, but we thank you all for your time.
Also here, there's just a brief survey here. If you want to jot down the forms, it would be great to get your feedback. As we go through this, we always prioritize the real needs of folks. So if you can complete that survey, it will be helpful. Thank you all so much.